Virgin Galactic launches on the stock market. Sir Richard Branson's company became the first public space tourism company ever this morning. Those shares have been rising in their trading debut. Let's go straight now to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. My co-host Adam Shapiro is there to take off. Adam?
Julie, thank you. And of course, we have Sir Richard Branson with us, but also some very important people who are part of this big day. We've got Chamath Palihapitiya, who is one of the men who made this possible, bringing this company to the public, as well as the CEO from Virgin Galactic, George Whitesides. Mr. Branson, let me start with you. When is that first flight? You're going to be on board, and who's going with you?
It will be next year. We've got something quite exciting happening, which we will be announcing soon as to who's coming with me. So watch this space.
Watch this space. But when we talk about space tourism, we're talking about the one vehicle that is flying now, and in February actually went up into the mesosphere, the edge of space, and that is the Virgin spaceship Unity. It's being fitted right now for the passenger cabin. Capable of taking 6 people. You'll be one of them, but is it Leonardo DiCaprio? Is it Ashton Kutcher? Who else?
No, I would love to see you again, so we're going to have another announcement. But okay. Yeah, as you know, we like to do things with a little bit of a splash, and we're going to have something quite exciting.
So this is a splash, and we're talking about a business, Chamath, that obviously you see a growth potential. Where is it? Because in previous interviews, despite having the 600 reservations, the $80 million in deposits, and the $120 million in potential revenue, how do you grow beyond that if there's only 2 million customer base out there?
Well, I think that we don't really know what the total customer base is, except to say that I think if you survey people in general, most people would raise their hands and say if they could go to space, they would. So really what we're doing is what many other businesses before us has done, which is you start with a beachhead, right? This is an incredibly technically complicated business that's taken Richard and George 15 years and $1 billion+ of capital to build. So today those tickets are reasonably expensive. That being said, over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be able to sort of work to make it more efficient, make it more cost effective, and as the price goes down, the total addressable market should go up. The best corollary to this that we've seen before, if you think about Tesla, they start with the Roadster, they start with the Model S, and now where is their commercial success? How do you build a $60 billion company? It's by servicing the mass market. And similarly, I think we'll be on that path over the next decade.
When you talk about Tesla, by the way, they've got a Roadster already on its way past Mars. But when you talk about bringing the costs down, how do you make this accessible? Because a ticket right now is $250,000. But a geek like me who wants to do this, how do you bring it down so that I can afford it?
Well, I think George is probably the best in capable of answering it. But let me tell you from my perspective what I saw. The greatest thing, if you're thinking about trying to bring costs down, is to actually know that you have an incredibly profitable business as it is. And the reason is because those profits help you figure out how to innovate such that you can actually bring costs down faster than you thought. And this is a business that has almost 70% operating margins, which means that it is as good of a business as a Google or an Apple or a Facebook.
How do you bring those margins, though? How do you protect them, but then bring on more aircraft, or spacecraft, rather? Only one flying now. What does being at scale? Because I think Chamath actually was quoted in a previous article that mid-next decade, you'll be at scale. What does that look like? How do you get there and protect those margins?
When our run out, we project out 5 spaceships operating by 2023, and that'll offer a fair amount of capacity into the market. Not a huge amount, but like a fair amount, so that we'd be flying about 1,500 people a year. Which is exciting. And the way that we bring the cost down is the way that any other aerospace business brings their costs down, right? They learn how to build things faster, cheaper, better, and so we've already instituted certain manufacturing efficiencies in our rocket motor production process and in our spaceship production process. And what's really nice about our business is that actually adding another spaceship only requires that we add another 10 to 15% more people down at the spaceport. And so you can tell that basically the business really starts to sing after 2 or 3 or 4 spaceships, because your labor, your incremental labor is not actually that much more. So those are all the things that we'll be using that enables us to drive down that cost.
In a perfect world, when you're at scale, how much is a ticket going to cost me? I'm not a billionaire yet.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
The danger of us saying nobody will buy and they'll wait 20 years for that. But I think if we if we have 20 or 30 spaceships, which I think we will, in 20 years' time, the price will come down dramatically. That's all I think I can say. I think what we'll do is we'll exhaust the amount of people who can pay the 250,000. Then we'll, but by then we'll have a number of spaceships. We'll be able to bring it down to 200. Then we'll be able to bring it down to 150, then 100, and so on.
So let me ask you this though: is this really a space tourism company, or is there something else here? For instance, Boeing created United Airlines to create demand for the product it made. Are you creating a product, the spaceship, that would be used for hypersonic travel, cutting the route from New York to Tokyo from 14 hours to 90 minutes? Is that really what's at play here?
To a large extent, it's part of what's at play. So Boeing have just invested in this company
$20 million.
Because they want to work with us in turning that into a reality, so in the future, we're the only spaceship company that are actually building spaceships that are shaped like airplanes, and therefore it's much easier for us to make them bigger and bigger and go point to point than it would be, for instance, for Elon or Jeff, because they're building big, more conventional rockets.
When you bring up when you bring up Bezos, Blue Origin's actually making plans, perhaps, as is SpaceX, maybe take people to the moon, whereas it seems your play is keep it up to space, but maybe point to point. Chamath, I want to ask you something. This is very cool. You were part of something very cool years ago, which we call Facebook. What advice do you have for Zuckerberg? I mean, you had to watch those hearings last week, and you've been critical of Facebook in the past. Do you still let your kids not use social media? And what advice do you have them? No social media?
I do not.
Why not? And what would you say to Zuckerberg?
I mean, from my perspective, I just think that there's a pretty positive correlation with too much device use and social media at too young of an age, and frankly, a lack of really good mental health. And so I would like my children to just grow up in a really natural environment with the world outside, playing, running, winning, losing, failing, all the typical things that a child needs to do to build a robust sense of self. And then eventually, when they can afford it, they can buy a phone and then they can get on these social media sites. I have not used them myself for 6 or 7 years, and I find myself to just be in a much better mental state as a result.
So let's bring it back to space. Now, each of you, I'm going to start with George. What's the coolest part about this? I mean, we can talk numbers, we can talk investors, but this is just really neat. For you, what's the cool aspect?
For me, really, what it is enabling people to accomplish their dream, right? Like we have 600 plus customers who've already signed up. We have 3,000 plus people who want to buy tickets. These are people who have, in many cases, dreamed about flying to space for decades since their childhoods, and we're going to actually make that happen. And to me, that's just really inspiring.
Chamath?
Well, in my perspective, like I've been lucky to be around entrepreneurs who just find incredible ways of inventing things that haven't been seen before. And the reality is, as Richard said, yes, it's a plane, but yes, it's also a rocket ship. Yes, it may eventually be able to go hypersonic. The totality of that, to me, I find deeply inspiring. And the exploration of, life outside of just the Earth in which we live, I think is really important for humankind. So for me, it's just an opportunity to be around great people and help usher that along in my own way.
And for you, you launched this in 2004. You defied the critics. What's the coolest part for you?
Only 500 people have ever been to space, and that's including the Chinese, the Americans, the Russians, and we have the capability of putting hundreds of thousands of people into space in the years to come, and that's ridiculously exciting. And so, here we are on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, launching the first spaceship company, and it's going to, the resources we get from this are going to enable us to do wondrous things.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. It is exciting to be on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. I'm going to put in a shameless plug for myself. It would be far more exciting to join you on that first flight in 2020, and they're promising that flight with Mr. Branson on board. The first flight will launch from Spaceport in the next 12 months or sooner. Back to you, Julie.
I know that space geek Adam Shapiro is very excited to be there talking about this today. Thanks, Adam.
SpaceX is ramping up its plans for flying people to the moon, and that is today's Musk Minute. SpaceX President and COO Gwynne Shotwell has outlined a timeline for when SpaceX will start flying people on its next generation rocket to the moon and Mars. The company raised more than $1.3 billion this year to build the Starship rocket and its high-speed satellite internet network Starlink. She said, "We want Starship in orbit next year. We want to land it on the moon before 2022 with cargo and with people shortly thereafter," Shotwell told investors at a conference. Guys, just
ambitious.
Seem like, I was going to say, in a very ambitious timeline. What do you make?
Yes, it's not going to happen, but SpaceX and Elon Musk and his people say things all the time that
they have a right.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, they just say things.
I just love that her name is Gwen Shotwell. Like, that is like so.
A moonshot.
Right.
It's
yeah.
I'm head of our moonshot division.
It's a great. It's an aptonym. I like names that go with your business. Vocabulary word. Study that for the SATs, kids.
I mean, another point though, to kind of bring this back into the business angle, is that it's amazing to see what SpaceX is doing in contrast to what Virgin Galactic is doing today. Which is right. They're IPOing, they're listing, and I think that represents these kind of two diverging ways to raise capital. Obviously, SpaceX doesn't feel the need to go public or be listed on a public exchange because they have so much capital right now. These comments were made at an investor conference, so obviously they feel like they have enough money to send someone to the moon. I mean, that just shows how much money is really flowing in the valley to be able to do this type of capital raising.
Yeah, I don't know. It makes me really nervous to even think about getting on one of those. And then nobody's talking about Blue Origin, which
I was just about to say, let's remember Bezos is in this business.
Yeah.
Brian, when you say SpaceX doesn't feel the need to be public, I would say not just doesn't feel the need, but Elon Musk would like to not be. We know how much he hates, reporting earnings, having shorts and bears talking about the stock, wanting to take Tesla private. I think would much prefer to not be in charge of any public exchange.
I don't want to conflate this with, bringing in WeWork again. God help me if I have to say that word again. But the thing is, we understand now just how much money is flowing in private markets, right? And when you are raising that money in private markets, it's a lot easier to go to an investor and sell a literal moonshot and raise money still than putting that in the public market and letting investors publicly decide that.
And going to space is so expensive, but it's really cool to see big entrepreneurs take on this endeavor. I think people do get really excited about it, but I mean, going back to Branson, though, Virgin Galactic, they actually have people who've already purchased the $250,000 tickets. Now they're going to like the edge of space orbit. I don't know the exact terms. They're not like going to the moon right now or anything, but I mean,
if you can't go to the moon, why go?
At one point, they were selling the tickets using Bitcoin, so man, maybe you got a good deal back in the day.
We understand and recall the lessons of we. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah,
it is funny. I appreciate, and all cynicism aside, I always have my sort of cynic's hat on when we talk about these companies and these CEOs. But I do appreciate those few CEOs who are focused on things like this because it is something that's not going to come to fruition really until probably after they're gone.
Yeah.
When we talk about Jeff Bezos, it's sort of widely understood that space is actually the most important thing to him. Colonizing Mars, I mean, that's the thing he most wants to help happen.
Could be the story of the next generation.
Won't happen in his lifetime, exactly.
All right, Jeff Bezos' space company Blue Origin is teaming up with other aerospace giants for a successful trip to the moon. Blue Origin will partner with Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and a not-for-profit engineering center to compete in NASA's project to send humans to the moon by 2024. The Amazon CEO is more than excited about what the possible accomplishments from the new partnership could be.
And this is the kind of thing, it's so ambitious, it needs to be done with partners. This is the only way to get back to the moon fast. And this time we're going back to the moon, and we're not going back to the moon to visit, we're going back to the moon to stay.
I mean, you want to stay on the moon?
I don't want to go into space.
Visit?
Every time they ask, do you want to be a space tourist? I say no, I'm not really interested.
Well, I agree, and we've done a version of these stories so many times here on Yahoo that it's like you have to then ask, do you want to go to space? And the joke is, Jen wants to go, but I don't want to go. I don't think anybody really wants to go.
Nobody wants to go, but I mean, look, from a business standpoint, as Shauna Smith says, you never bet against space.
Right.
So I mean, it is an interesting business story, and I think that it is kind of fascinating to see the coupling of these types of private companies too, right? Everyone's talking about how much private money exists in this space, and I don't think anyone is seriously saying that SpaceX will go public anytime soon. But it is just interesting to see. I mean, these are still massive industries, and I think that if you were to rewind to 20 or 30 years ago, people would probably be wondering if private equity had enough, or private markets had enough money to be able to do this type of stuff, to send things into space.
Right.
It's pretty amazing.
It's great. I mean, I think whenever the story comes up, I wonder, why is Jeff Bezos so excited about space? Why isn't he more excited about Amazon?
You'd have to ask
I think
him.
It's a fair question. I think it's a fair question. Amazon's doing fine, still does amazing stuff, has its problems, but why isn't he more focused on that?
Well, because I think this is his hobby, right?
I know, but he's the CEO of the biggest company in the world, second biggest, third biggest, whatever.
Right. Well,
I have hobbies, you have hobbies. We're not billionaires.
I guess.
We're not responsible for public
It brings up the question, I mean, how much bandwidth do you have? Is it almost like a Cobb-Douglas function of you only have so many resources to allocate? So, does your investment in your hobby take away from your ability to perform?
We're moving on after Cobb-Douglas functions. Yeah, show off there.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.